Welcome back. Okay, I'm not going to teach you anymore right now about the kings of Israel and Judah. I want to take a break and I want to do something that I want to tell you a story. Like so many stories to tell you. But I was just recently in Israel. My sister in the Lord and I went to Israel in March for a month. And we did a lot of really fascinating things there. This was my 30, 32nd trip, 31st trip, something like that. I'm not sure. I lost track. I know that sounds a lot, but I have friends that have gone even more. I've been blessed in the sense that I've been able to live in Israel. I met my husband in Israel, married him there. He was a Christian Zionist, loved Israel as much as I did, and we were blessed to be in Israel many times, even having a home in Jerusalem, which there's no end to the blessings of that. So, being in Israel is often, and as long as we have been over the years, you would say that there was nothing new, that nothing that we hadn't seen, and yet there's so much. As much as we've traveled and gone, there's still much that we haven't seen and haven't done. But one of the things that we have loved to do was to go to Qumran, which is right on the northern end of the Dead Sea. And at the time, the time of Jesus and just around that time, right after him, the whole time there was all this chaos in the land. The Romans were in control and everything. And there were a group of people down at the Dead Sea called the Essenes. And they were ultra religious. They were all men, I believe. And they had vows of poverty. And they lived down there in the heat of the desert, right on the top of the Dead Sea. And I think they took 2 baths a day. I can't remember for sure. And they practiced righteousness and cleanliness and a lot of quiet time, almost a monastery. And they wrote this hand-copied scroll. Well, at some point, and we believe it was just prior to the Roman overthrowing of the temple in 70 A.D., the Essenes knew that the Romans were coming, and so they decided that they had to hide their work. And so they took the scrolls that they had copied and they put them in jars similar to this with lids on them. I have 2 different sizes and shapes here. And they took them up this wall. Now, I don't know whether they went up the wall like that or if they came over the cliff. And they hid these scrolls in caves, in these jars. Actually, they were walking out a prophetic sentence there and doing that. Archaeology, just prior to Israel being reestablished as a nation in 1948, I believe it was 1945, some Bedouin shepherds were out in the fields with their sheep. And, you have to do a lot of things to occupy yourself when you're out there with slow-moving sheep. And so these kids got really good with rocks and with their slingshots with rocks. And this one kid threw a rock and it went up into this cave, and he heard a tinkling sound, like when glass or pottery breaks. And that just heightened his interest in what was in that cave that would make that noise. So they agreed as a group that they would go back and that they would explore the caves. Well, instead, one of the guys ran ahead of the group that night, the next day, whatever it was, went back to the cave and found these jars. Now, these are obviously replicas, and they're very small compared to what was in there. But they found the jars, and they found in the jars these parchment scrolls. And they didn't know what they were. These guys were not intelligent men. They were not learned men. And they found scrolls with ancient writing on it. And so they took the scrolls, and 2 days later, one of them went into Bethlehem to an antiques dealer, and they said, yeah, maybe they're worth some value. And they gave a few dollars for them, not much. And then over the years, eventually those scrolls began to find their way in the hands of the Jewish archaeologists and etc. And many of them are now at the Rockefeller Institute, I believe it is, in Jerusalem. the scrolls have been very controversial over the years. So this year, when my sister and I were there, it had been a long time since she'd been to Israel. David and I took her in 2001, and then she and I went again in March. And so I wanted to see the Ezekiel stones, which neither one of us had ever seen. And I wanted to make sure that she saw the Isaiah scrolls because I didn't remember whether she had seen them or not. And quite frankly, neither did she. So that's what I have here in my hand is a copy of the Isaiah scroll, and we'll get to that in a minute. But for several years, I had heard about the Ezekiel stones. There was very little knowledge on them, very little information out there. I heard several teachings. I had heard several hints at teachings about them, but that was all. And so I wanted to know about these Ezekiel stones. Well, several years ago, my girlfriend was in Israel, and somebody told her about them, and she went to see them. And she said, there's this big mystery. And you go into this building, and they pretend that they don't even know what you're talking about. And then finally you get a hold of somebody, and they'll say, well, they're round back. And it's kind of like this. We don't want you to go. We don't want you to see them. She finally saw them. She came home. She told me about them. I've got to see those. Well, I've been to Israel several times since, but I've been under such crush of time that I did not get to see them. So I was determined, come heck or high water, this trip was going to see them. So we rented an apartment. Not anything unusual for me in Israel. I rent apartments. I drive cars. I live like an Israeli. So we rented the apartment, which was city center. And I said to her, I said, you know what? I know where the stones are held in the Ben Zvi Institute. And I said, I know where that is. I used to walk by it every day on my way to work at the embassy. So let's not drive. I think parking there is going to be a huge problem. So let's walk. It's just a couple blocks. Well, we left the apartment. I'm in the lead, and I turn a block too soon. And when I do make this block too soon turn, I realize very quickly that I've gotten us lost, which is really silly. Now, we could have turned right around and gone back to the apartment, gotten our bearings, and gone to the other block. Had I done that, we would have missed the Ben Zvi Institute, because in getting lost, we found it. I'm lost, but now I'm found. So anyhow, we make our way to the Ben Zvi Institute, and we go in, and sure enough, nobody knows anything about it. Well, I had forgotten how to look up Ezekiel in Hebrew. I forgot how to say it in Hebrew, and it's Yehezkel. So we wanted the Yehezkel stones. And this is an institute, so there were meetings going on and classes and that kind of thing. And so we see this group of people. We first walk in, we ask this guy in the library about them. He goes, he didn't know anything. So based on what my friend had told me, we didn't know whether he really didn't know anything or if he's just playing dumb. And so we go out here and we see this group of people on a break. And so we asked them about the Ezekiel stones, because as I said, I forgot to say Yehezkel stones. And they don't even know what we're talking about. And they're going, oh. And some of them spoke English. And so finally, the little gal that works there came in. And they said, ask her. She'll know. She knows everything. Well, we went over and asked her. And she said, oh, sure. They're over here. And she said, you can't get there. What it used to be, you had to go around to the back and come in that way. But you can't go that way now because there's all this construction going on. So we're going to have to go through this classroom. So she ushers us through this classroom. And there they are. It's kind of like, oh my gosh. And so there was this little appendage kind of add-on to the building. And in that appendage is this like a display case of things at a slope, like shelves with a sloping. And there are the stones. Oh my gosh. I've heard about these for so long. And now I'm finally getting to see them. Well, she had to turn on the light for us. And I said to her, may we take pictures? Of course. Wow, I should have said, can I hold one? So my sister and I are standing there, and we're just in awe. Now, these stones were found in the tomb of Ezekiel years ago. No one knows for sure, but it was at least, it's over 100 years ago. And the story behind the stones is this. Now, there's several variances, but I'm going to go with this one because I think it's kind of fun. So the story is that some Bedouins in Iraq were basically, they were grave robbing, tomb robbing. And they were in Ezekiel's in Ezekiel's tomb, and a stone had fallen from the wall onto the floor. Now, apparently it hadn't fallen very far because it was just like there intact. And they noticed that it had strange writing on it. And so, being the industrious little guys that they are, they popped all the rest of the stones off the wall, and here they are. Their stones are about 12 inches, roughly 12 inches square. Now, this piece of paper is, normal typing sheet is like 8.5 by 11. So let's just say the stones are about this size. Okay? Now, on the stones in ancient Hebrew, in a continual lines, no spaces, no punctuation, anything like that, in the continual line are these words in ancient Hebrew. And it's the book of Ezekiel. Most of the stones are marble. Some of them are black basalt. And those basalt stones are the ones with the most negative prophecies concerning Israel. Well, I'm in awe of them. Some of them have corners broken off of them. Some of them are cracked. I believe there's 66 altogether. Well, when we were there, several were missing because they had been taken to the Israel Museum for evaluation. Now, the thing that makes these stones so incredibly unique is the fact that they are in bas relief. That means the words are raised, the letters are raised off of the stone. They protrude instead of intrude. And there's absolutely no markings on the stones of chisels or etching or anything. It's just like as if they've been typed across perfectly, and no smearing, no markings, no anything. And so Israel is trying to figure out how this happened, how this writing got on there. Well, being the imaginary person that I am, I don't have a real hard time figuring that out. I figure they were there by the finger of God, just the same as were the stones that Moses came down from Mount Sinai with, written by the finger of God. Now, the background on these stones is, as I was saying, the Bedouin explorers, grave robbers, if you will, they got these stones and they had them in their possession. They didn't know what they were. They knew they had some value, but they really didn't know what they were. Well, one of the chieftains became ill. He needed a doctor's care. And so they went into the city, I think it was Beirut, but I'm not sure, in Lebanon. And there was a pharmacist there. And I remember, this is over 100 years ago. There was a pharmacist there who also practiced medicine. And so they said to the pharmacist, if you can make the chieftain well, we will give you something of great value. Well, the chieftain got well. And the stones, all 66 of them, were transferred into the hands of this pharmacist, who happened to have a wife who was a Christian Arab. Now, how much of that's actual truth and how much of that is somebody's hypothesis, I don't know. But it's a good story. So they had the stones in their possession for a long time. It's just prior to 1948, 1945, Israel, it's after the Holocaust. Israel is there, but it's not there. It's still under British control. The UN vote on November 29th, 1947 was going to give Israel the right to exist. But that hadn't happened yet because it's 1945. But this Jewish guy, who was an archaeologist, an explorer, and a little bit of maybe he's an Indiana Jones guy. He hears about these and he tries to buy them. And they won't sell them. So then the lady, the pharmacist's widow, wants to return to France. And she decides, as I said, she's a Christian Arab, and she decides in her heart, God spoke to her, and these stones need to go to Israel. So she got them into the hands of this Jewish, I think his name was Cohen, subterfuge somehow, and he got them into Israel secretively. She sold them to him for like $5 pounds or something, a small amount of money. So they were taken into Israel. They were given to Ben Zvi, who was the second president of Israel. He had them in his home. He wasn't sure what to do with them. Wasn't absolutely sure what they were because it was written in ancient Hebrew. So he finally decided that after he was deceased, the Ben Zvi Institute was created, and they put the stones there. And then a family raised the money to put them in a secure environment, although how secure it is, I don't know. So we're standing there in awe of these stones that are thousands of years old, just in awe of the way that God protects things and protects his word. And as scripture tells us that in Jeremiah, I believe it's Jeremiah 31, I think, where Israel's going, Judah is going into captivity, but the day will come when they will return. And so they buy some land from Hanuel. They put the scroll, they seal the scroll, and they put it in a jar for safekeeping, and the jar is put away because the day will come when they will return to the land, and this will be the deed for the land. Well, I couldn't help but think about that with these Ezekiel stones and with the Isaiah scrolls. So we left there. Before we left there that day, I wanted to get permission to talk about them on the TV show because I thought, well, if they're top secret and all this other stuff, I don't want to create an issue. And so we found the manager of the place, and he said, of course you can talk about them. And he said, what's your TV show? And I said, well, I teach Bible. And he said, of course you can talk about them. So I got permission from him to do that. So we go back to the apartment. We didn't get lost that time. We go back to the apartment. We get in the car, and we drive just a short distance, maybe a mile, to the Israel Museum, where we go in to see the Isaiah scroll. Now, the Isaiah scroll was found in one of the jars at Qumran. It is the entire scroll of Isaiah. Now, this obviously is a replica, but it's the entire scroll of Isaiah. There's some damage to it from over the years, and the edges are a little rough, but it has been preserved by God for his people. And it's in better shape than that, let me tell you. So anyhow, we went from the Ezekiel stones to the Isaiah scroll, all in just a matter of a very short distance of not only time, but of mileage, to see these two amazing pieces of history. Now, the Isaiah scroll is in a very special place called the Shrine of the Book. And the top of the building looks like this. And there's water that is sprayed on the building all day long. It looks like a fountain, but it's part of the temperature control situation. And it's configured like our Constitution, where if Israel's under an air attack or something like that, it goes down into the ground and is sealed over and it is protected, because this is a priceless treasure. Now, while we were there at the Israel Museum looking at the Isaiah scroll, it wasn't just the Isaiah scroll that was there. There were a lot of fragments from scrolls that they found. Ultimately, they found a lot of caves at Qumran. In fact, I think they just recently discovered another one. The Essenes had the wisdom to know. They'd read the prophecies. They knew. They'd been copying the prophecies. And they had found several intact scrolls there. None of them as completely intact as the Isaiah scroll. A lot of them they could piece together and see, little increments of scrolls, broken up pieces, weathered. They didn't have saran wrap or any of the things that we have now to store things in. And I'm not sure if we wrap something like this up with saran wrap or something like that it would last all the time. But look at that. So they put the scroll, they rolled it up, they wrapped it in leather, and then they put it in the jar, and they sealed the jar, and then somehow they attached rope around the jar, and somehow they got it either up or down. Probably they went down, because the Essenes community was on top of the cliff instead of at the bottom. So I imagine they went over the cliff like that. Now, whomever this cliff dweller that was that did that had to be a pretty brave guy, because it's probably 40 feet over the cliff before you get to the entrance of the cave. So you would have to have some kind of rappelling equipment to do it. And they certainly didn't have that in those days. So we were here in Israel. We see the Ezekiel stones and the Isaiah stones in the same day. Pretty incredible, I thought, that this would happen, that we would see something like that. That is the history of Israel, the past, the present, and the future. The prophecies in those two different situations where Israel you could see past, present, and future. For us, it was very exciting. It was one of the highlights of the trips, and let me tell you, it was really a great trip. There were many highlights, many very special things that happened. But the scroll is written in Hebrew. Well, both of them are written in Hebrew. But the scroll is written in a more modern Hebrew than the Ezekiel stones. In fact, some of the Jews were standing there literally reading the scroll. The Ezekiel stones, people can read them if they've studied ancient Hebrew. Now, it's not the ancient where you have an ox head and stuff like that. But it's pretty amazing to me that God kept his word. I don't mean like he kept a promise, because he did. He kept promises all through the word. But he kept his word protected and stored away. I wonder, as things unfold over the next few years, and as pressure heats up on Israel, and this is the 70th year of Israel, and this fall we're entering into the Jewish year of 5779, the last of the decade of the 70s on the Jewish calendar. And we're kind of wondering and expecting what will happen next. We don't know. But every time the world community wants to come down on Israel and say the Jews didn't exist there, it was never a Jewish land, it was Palestine, it was the Philistines who are the Palestinians owned it. All this stuff that they talk about and the denial that goes forth, just like in a matter of hours, almost, not quite, but almost, they find something. They find this little tiny bell that was on the robe of the high priest. You know, the high priest had pomegranates and little bells attached to the bottom of his garment, so that as he walked to and fro, they could hear him. This was his ornamental garment. They find seals. Seals of a king, seals of a gatekeeper, seals of different business people. They have found houses. They found the burnt house. There's all kinds of things that they have found in Jerusalem. The city of David is being excavated now. They've been working on it now for several years. In fact, my husband and I used to park on top of it, not knowing where we were parking. And now the whole thing, the parking lot's gone. The city of David exists, and it is quite a little adventure to go down there and look at it. And it's easy access. You buy a ticket, you walk down like 80 steps, remembering what goes down comes back up. So it's beautiful. The artifacts that are there that they've found and have restored or put away. There are other places they've gone to, not only Hezekiah's tunnel, but other tunnels that go under the city, very narrow, scary tunnels. All kinds of stuff going on. Every time the world community tries to deny Israel and her existence, her righteousness, the fact that she belongs to the Jewish people, every time God reveals himself in such a super colossal way. And I believe this is what's happening today. He is revealing himself through the auspices of archaeology. It is amazing to me. We went up north. When we were north, there were several big digs that we were going to go to. One of them, Dan, right on the Lebanese border. We ended up not going because we were there in March, and normally March is perfectly cool weather, and it was so hot. We decided we liked the air conditioner better than we liked being out in the heat, so we gave up a couple of days of exploring just to be cool. So I would encourage you to look up Ezekiel stones, look up Isaiah scroll. You can get on your computer and look them up. You can learn a lot about them. And then when you go to Israel, make sure that those two places, the Israel Museum with the Isaiah scroll and Yad Ben Zvi, are on your tour guide, because those are places that when you get home and you think about it, you'll realize what an awesome experience it was to be there and to see these artifacts, to see God's preservation of His Word. And one of the things that I think is particularly exciting about the Ezekiel scrolls is the way he got them out of Iraq. You know, ISIS came in and they destroyed so many things. They destroyed the tomb of, who was it? Was it Jonah, I believe? Totally destroyed it. I don't get that. I don't get that kind of stuff. But what evil there is in man, that they have to destroy things, that they have to remove things, that they have to destruct things that speak of history. I don't understand that evil, but it's not mine to understand. It's God's to deal with. So I brought home these little jars, but I didn't bring them home this trip. I've bought them before. But for me, it's great fun to have these artifacts around my home and to look at them. These are obviously replicas. They're not really, really expensive, but they are encouraging to me, because I think nothing I do today really matters. What matters is the future, and the future is in His hands, and He will preserve that, the past and the present and the future, as a witness to all who are coming behind us. What we hope in that is that everybody pays attention. And with that, I close.